33 Thompson Street, Manhattan, New York. There is a building. This building was discovered on August 4th, 1964, and presently is the base of operations for the FBC, the Federal Bureau of Control. This building is known among the staff as the oldest house, and it has always been here. Always. It is the home to the unknown, the unknowable, the bizarre, objects of power, altered items, and altered people. But now, through the walls, there is a sound, a noise that contaminates all. Something that twists and turns the very fabric of what we know to be real. It's like drowning, being suppressed, and at the same time, undone. Where there once was order, there is now chaos. The mundane has been supplanted with the weird. The stability and normality of concrete brutalism has given way to the entropy that is the hiss. Nothing is safe. So when I was writing this up, I was initially stuck with ideas as to what I could say about Control that hasn't already been said. I'm maybe a couple of years too late to the party now, and I feel like everything that can be said has been said. What hasn't anyone explored about the game visually, graphically, in the art direction, in the story, the music, the characters, the evolving mystery? Every aspect of this game is poetry. It's perhaps one of the best games of all time, and it certainly exists on my top 10 list of best games of all time. For those who don't know, however, let's bring you up to speed. Control is a supernatural, paranormal, cosmic horror, new weird fiction built around the game style of a third-person shooter with a bit of a Metroidvania vibe. Yeah, I know, that's a mouthful. Let's just call it new weird. The plot follows the adventures of Jessie Faden as she attempts to remove an infestation she calls the Hiss from the offices of the Federal Bureau of Control. Jessie Faden is our protagonist, and while she is the central character of the game, she is probably one of the most mysterious humans we meet. A victim of an event in her childhood that altered the very fabric of reality in her hometown of Ordinary, she has made it her life's mission to find her missing brother, Dylan, who was taken into custody by the FBC shortly after what was known as the Ordinary Incident, or Ordinary AWE, Altered World Event. The Ordinary AWE occurred when both Jessie and Dylan were children. Living in their hometown of Ordinary, the two happened to find a mysterious slide projector that opened up gateways to other realities. One of the slides allowed them to come in contact with an entity known as Polaris, at the same time releasing an entity also known as the Not Mother, who would go on to terrorize the town and its residents until Jessie was one of the only survivors. As a result of the Ordinary Incident, Jessie exists in a now symbiotic relationship with Polaris, a resonance-based life form that has the power to cancel out the Hiss's abilities. Shortly before entering the office, Jessie soon meets with the director of the FBC, Zachariah Trench, or to be precise, the former director. As the story began, Mr. Trench unalived himself with a gun known as the service weapon. Jessie finds this nifty pistol, and this is when things start to get really interesting. After taking the service weapon for herself, this is when we meet the Board, an extra-dimensional entity that has its own mysterious agenda. Appearing at first to be somewhat altruistic, We soon learn that they have their own designs for humanity. Though nothing is outright stated, instead, we are given this feeling of something much, much bigger than ourselves is looming overhead. Even the betrayal of the board, this black inverted pyramid in a white void, looks down upon us, the player, and the rest of the world, always above, suggesting that they are from somewhere very, very high up in the pecking order. Now Jessie is appointed with the task of being the director of the FBC and must rid the oldest house of the hiss while also searching for clues as to her missing brother. So, let's clean house. The themes of Control are nuanced, interwoven, and bleed into each other like the threads of the most perfect story-driven tapestry, ranging from the weird fiction to the daddist poetry and even just good old-fashioned plain creepy body horror. There is something in every corner of this game that contributes to the larger cosmic horror presence throughout the story. While the game does lean into the elements such as the mold men and even protagonist Jessie Faden's backstory feels like a Stephen King novel, the main theme of the game can be easily described as new weird. New weird is an evolving genre of fiction that began sometime around 1990 to 2000, focusing on various themes and subgenres. During the early stages of production, narrative lead Anna McGill, along with their writing team, referenced many books, particularly Jeff Vandermeer's novel Annihilation, citing it as the biggest influence, along with the sequel, Authority, being a strong influence for the FBC as a whole. Stories like these use their otherworldly and sometimes mind-bending themes and visuals to tell broader, more complex concepts, being able to take singular ideas and spin them off into multiple branches to make you ask questions about what you're consuming. A great example of this is the idea of concepts and narrative threads branching and expanding. One just has to look at the novel The House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, a novel with a totally unique narrative style that is unlike any story in existence and feels incredibly fitting into the world of Control, with many of its own weird fiction aspects serving as inspiration for the shifting non-Euclidean labyrinth known as the Oldest House. The opening of Control reflects this, featuring a narration given by Jessie talking about the idea of finding a world so much bigger than our own, simply by looking beyond a flimsy idea of what our world presently is, suggesting that we would recoil in horror if we knew the real truth of the world. This idea of hidden worlds, hidden truths, and hidden concepts beyond our understanding has always fascinated me as someone who both consumes and creates their own media. The one thing that new weird and cosmic horror does so perfectly well is inspired by its name, the scope. Cosmic horror is the idea that we are so small, so very, very small, and that there is a universe out there that we cannot fathom, like ants trying to understand the stars. Buried further in this central theme within Control, there are several notable subgenres and concepts inspired by the works of Carl Jung, Kafka, and more specifically Jungian concepts such as archetypes, collective unconscious, and synchronicity. We see this on full display as the world bends around our protagonist, suggesting that she is imprinting her ideas and herself onto the cosmos of the Oldest House. When we first enter, we see paintings of Trench in several locations. However, once Jessie takes up the service weapon and is tasked with the mantle of director, the building subtly shifts. Suddenly, all the portraits where Trench hung, Jessie looms overhead, saying that there has been no mistake. You have been chosen, you are the director now, whether you want it or not. It's not just limited to paintings, everyone knows who you are. You are known throughout the minds of the people as the director, much to Jessie's reluctance. Jessie Faden's story has a lot to unpack there, and some of it I'll get into later. But for the most part here, it is trauma, change, loss, self-discovery, and acceptance. It's about the past, the future, and how it all comes to a head when you must confront it all. In fiction, we talk about the hero's journey, the structure of a protagonist's story. A great example of this is Luke Skywalker in A New Hope, a young hero who is destined for greater things and dreams of a new world. He gets swept up in the story, and his home is destroyed, leaving him with nowhere to return to, pushing him onwards to an adventure. But he can never return home again to this moisture farm. Similarly, Jessie undertakes a darker form of the hero's journey. Even before the game starts, her home is gone. Her parents and brother have vanished off the face of the earth, the latter taken in by the FBC. And from that point on, she lives with Polaris, this entity inside her mind guiding her. her protection and reason, and acts as a bridge between the character and the player. This subtle blurring of the lines is helped by Polaris never having dialogue, and all of Jessie's interactions with her are within Jessie's internal monologues. Even the opening of the game seems to be aimed at the player, but suddenly shift gears to actually being addressed to Polaris, a subtle trick in the writing and direction that helps place the audience in the correct mindset as to where they need to be within this story. Jessie is a fantastic character. Much like the Oldest House, we explore her backstory in little chunks, sometimes files found in games, other times it's what we as the audience are slowly let in on. Over time, we slowly get more and more of her life before the FBC, what drove her here, and what keeps her moving forwards. It is eventually revealed, or perhaps more implied, in confidence to Polaris, that really motivated Jessie after all this time is pain and guilt. Her pain of being left alone in a world, unbelieving of what happened to her, and the guilt of being one of the few people who could walk away from the ordinary incident. Constantly searching for answers and as to clues as to the people who took her brother, Jessie has been pushed away from the world in her singularly minded quest, driven by survivor's guilt that never left her able to connect with our world. During the latter points of the game, she seems to be acclimatizing more to the Oldest House in the FBC, wary of the fact that she's actually starting to enjoy this place and her powers. This place, in an ironic twist, might be the most normal place for Jessie. What should be met with horror and alienation is met with resignation, then humour, and ultimately enjoyment. One reading could be seen as Jessie walking through the themes of a Kafka story, stepping through such noted concepts of transformation, family duty, responsibility, and alienation. When studying closer, almost meets the beats of Jessie Faden's story in its entirety. And all the while these elements are true, I think the major aspect of Jessie's story obviously comes from the game's title and the biggest theme of the entire game, and a major theme for every character and what they struggle with to some degree or another. It's about control. We see it everywhere in the big and small. The Hiss, an invasive entity whose ultimate goal is total subjugation, to make everyone speak its strange, terrible Daddist incantation. All their actions within the story are that of a parasitic invasion, with what seems to be the simple need to expand its influence, but at the same time using innocent bystanders, taking away their individuality, their agency, and their minds to do so. Casper Darling, head of research at the FBC, we only ever see brief moments of Casper throughout the game, recordings left playing for no one. But when found, we slowly see Darling deteriorate as he begins to suddenly realise the depths of his folly, and probably even the loss of his sanity as he begins to ascend to a potentially new form of life. Zachariah Trench, the director of the FBC, and after he was exposed to even a sliver of the Hiss, he became paranoid and convinced that other people were attempting to depose him. He almost became mad with power, with the Hiss subtly influencing him. He tightened his grip on the Bureau. Ironically though, with all this power grabbing he was doing, he was not in control of his own actions. Eventually, all of this destroys him as the game begins. Emily Pope is a less overt example, but still important to the structure of the characters within the game. As a researcher who works under Darling, she is constantly having her work belittled and mocked by him, and was never given the respect she deserved. With Jessie becoming the director and in the turmoil of the Hiss invasion, Emily is pushed into becoming Jessie's new head of research and must take control of an entire department of ragtag researchers. And then there is Dylan Faden, Jessie Faden's younger brother and willing victim of the Hiss invasion. Dylan, similarly to Jessie, has been robbed of their agency and ability to do anything. While Jessie was on the outside, however, Dylan had been captured by the FBC and kept as part of the Prime Candidate program, and was being trained as to be the next director until Trench decided he was a lost cause after he violently killed a researcher. Dylan's story mirrors Jessie's in that he is someone who has been robbed of life and power, and through the Hiss invasion discovered their potential. But rather than using his power to help others, he aligns himself with the Hiss, becoming something even more creepy and disturbing. Beaten down and broken by the trauma of his past and by the FBC, Dylan hopes to use the power of the Hiss to attack the astral plane and corrupt the board, and with it potentially gain access to even higher and greater forms of unimaginable power. Coming full circle, we have Jessie, a character who has been robbed of something so precious. Her life, her future, her family, being watched from the shadows by a secret government organization, being overshadowed by her guilt, loss of her agency, when she was institutionalized, the failure to save her brother, and being burdened by the idea that she may be responsible for the destruction of her hometown with the loss of life that entailed. Jessie is deeply troubled by all of this, and while she was only intending to seek answers, she has yet to realize what she needed was control. As the song goes, you can't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need. Jessie did get answers. Probably not all of the ones she needed, as with all questions in Control, the game, they spin off and spiral off into bigger and bigger questions, bigger ideas, and bigger concepts that us, the player, and Jessie keep thinking about. However, what Jessie did find was control. Control over her life, her autonomy, and in a way her fate. We see through documentation in-game that Jessie has spent a long time travelling, seemingly without direction, working dead-end jobs, and doing nothing but being singularly consumed with trying to find her brother. Once she enters the oldest house, she has entered a space that gifts her with the power she needs all of her life. Abilities in context to her brother she uses selflessly, putting her life at risk to save people. So as antagonists in a game, the Hiss is unlike anything that I've ever really come across in fiction. They are being treated like both a virus and a malevolent force, simultaneously being compared to a force of nature and a monstrous imperialist army. Because of this, we are able to fear them, but also gain a fairly good idea as to the scale of the threat. The Hiss just sit on the edge of the cosmically unknowable. We have a vague understanding of how they work, perhaps a small idea of what they want, but the game's intentionally sparse means of storytelling, we only capture a glimpse as to what the Hiss really is. But if you're able to put the parts together, you can get a shape as to what they really are. And once you get a shape, it's easier to see what should go inside.
The thunderstorm distorts you. Happiness comes. White pearls with yellow and red in the eye. Through a mirror inverted as my right.
Okay, so it's time to talk fascism. And my god, this whole section was written about 4 months ago, so... yeah. We're just gonna have to kind of live with the untimely nature of this section, but bear with me, it's important to the essay. Fascism has changed in the decades since the Second World War. It has morphed into something we can't always see at first glance. Fascism got smart, understanding that it had to conceal what it really was in order to mask its true intentions. Even so far as to change its name. It's no longer fascism or the hard right, it's now about the alt-right. It no longer uses what could be considered fascist symbology, but icons that are taken from 4chan, Reddit, or seemingly innocent emojis. Ironic imagery that is meant to deflect interrogation with their seemingly cartoonish meaning. No one takes a childish cartoon seriously, so why take a person seriously? After all, it's just a joke. What's wrong with a harmless meme? Dylan Faden's story almost perfectly matches what you could call the modern pipeline for fascism. We see this a lot online, how exposure to certain ideas just so happen to align with a person's way of thinking and can push them down the rabbit hole and into a world that is somewhat pre-molded for them. Spaces online right now often appeal to those people who have been downtrodden, hurt, or abused, the most vulnerable people that can easily be targeted because of their status in society. Once you find a comforting voice who tells you who the real enemy is with a string of proof to convince you, how hard are you going to convince yourself otherwise? By the time we meet Dylan in-game, he is living with a considerable amount of untreated and unaddressed trauma. He is isolated, kept alone because of his uncontrollable and violent outbursts. He doesn't even consider himself to be Dylan Faden anymore, referring to himself simply as P6. So when given the chance for freedom, he grabbed at it. Because of his childhood exposure to Polaris, he's not been affected the same way by the Hiss. He isn't overtaken, but he willingly gives himself to this new power to have something. Fascism often appeals to those who have been on the outside because of its loose and always hollow philosophical position. That's not to say fascism doesn't have a philosophy, but what it doesn't have is an internally consistent philosophy. In his 1995 essay Fascism, Italian philosopher Umberto Eco notes that there are 14 main structural points to fascism, but none of them can actually function all at once. Often at times they contradict each other.
The contradictory picture I described was not the result of tolerance, but of political and ideological discombobulation. But it was a rigid discombobulation, a structured confusion. Fascism was philosophically out of joint, but emotionally it was firmly fastened to some archetypal foundations.
Dylan is, ironically, the person in the middle in this situation. He will be used by the Hiss less as an agent, but more as a simple tool. His exposure to Polaris would normally make him the antithesis of what the Hiss want, but there will always be people who will align themselves with fascists to get what they want, and the internally inconsistence of fascism will allow it just long enough for him to be useful. After all, the Hiss wants subjugation and total control. Dylan is, by and large, opposed to this by his existence. The pillars of fascism exist only to lure people in with a philosophy that someone can agree with. But not only that, but in his essay he lists the 14 pillars, one of which is such.
Disagreement is a sign of diversity. Fascism grows up and seeks for consensus by exploiting and exacerbating the natural fear of difference. The first appeal of a fascist or prematurely fascist movement is an appeal against the intruders.
The Hiss operate as a force with a single goal, that is, kill you and everyone else in the FBC. Those who survived the initial invasion of the Hiss are presently wearing HRAs, Hadron Resonance Amplifiers. This allows them to keep safe while moving around the oldest house. In a way, they are immune, so if they can't conform, they are diverse, and subsequently, they must be destroyed. But the Hiss doesn't just corrupt people, they also corrupt objects of power. Objects of power represent the different abilities you can unlock in the game, but they are also strange objects with bizarro powers that are normally quite docile until the Hiss arrive and corrupt them. In the real world, the world outside of the game, we can see objects of power in our daily lives. They're just less fantastical. TV, radio, news, memes, humour, comedy, these are all things we recognise and can gravitate towards, and are generally we are exposed to all the time, but sometimes a force can corrupt it. It can make it harder to contain, making it impossible to contain. It can become dangerous and violent, and eventually it can be used to kill. It's no secret that fascists use ironic memes, humour and altered news to be able to dog whistle and communicate with each other, to spread their influence further to people who might not be aware of their tactics. The Hiss isn't just an entropic force that kills, it's also a manipulative force. It weaponizes fears, anxieties, desires, needs, pushing lies, false realities, and even feel-good emotions. Dylan openly says it feels good to say the Hiss incantation. While other people mindlessly spread a corrupting force, Dylan is there in the center, knowingly saying the words because he thinks it will give him power and agency. He is, in a way, aware of the meaning of the words, and he has a form of power with them. It's not hard to see where this is going. Is it openly stated in the game? Well, no. But much like real life, fascists don't walk around the street declaring they're fascists. Again, I know this was written so long ago, please just bear with me. They are quieter now, more coded, and you really have to pay attention to spot them. When you first meet Dylan, you have a chance to talk to him. Over time, he becomes vague and cryptic. Mostly he talks about his strange dreams, one of which he tells to you in great detail. In my dream, the Hiss had broken free of this prison, this house. I'd set it free, and the president was there to welcome us. He was the first one to take the Hiss in, spread the word. At first, many people thought it was horrifying, that he was horrifying, but also, many people who heard words wanted to welcome the Hiss in, and slowly, more and more of them came around, until the whole world brought together by the Hiss. It was wonderful. So there's a lot to unpack here, most notably the ambition of taking a seat of power by forcing it to operate to your agenda, to use that place and high power to further espouse the ideology, and that everyone in turn must unify under it. As I said, is it openly stated in the game? Not really. And is this me reading into the texture of the game? Possibly. But is my enjoyment of media improved when the media challenges me to think about it and the world around me just a little bit more? Most certainly. I think media should make us think more about the world around us. Not always, and not always like this, but it's interesting to go into something and be able to view things both with a creative and critical eye. This is really what got me thinking about this essay, taking a long look at things and examining them in a new way. I've heard many interpretations, examinations, and dissections of a myriad of themes, stories, and ideas that crop up within the game, with some of them focused on the idea of the hiss being a form of toxic societal norms, conversion therapy, and even depression and the spiraling issues that come with it. What's fascinating is that these are all valid and important readings of the concept. Art is subjective. We can view so many things in so many different ways, see ourselves, see others, grow to know more, or perhaps be prompted to go and learn more. That's the power of good art. It makes us want to know more. Game design has been an evolving concept from text-based point-and-click games to FMV to fully rendered 3D worlds. The look and feel of the game are balanced by how well we, as the players, can interact in it, play in it, and simply enjoy it as a world to explore. And look, it would be hyperbolic if I didn't have proof, but Control has won 19 awards and nominated for 49 more. And from what I counted, a massive number of these were just from game design and direction, and you can see it in The Oldest House. The first thing you notice when you walk through those doors at the start of the game, and the further you go into its world, is you can feel the weight of The Oldest House bearing down on you. And this carries on the more you play the game. There's a sort of pressure that builds upon you. The deeper you go down, the more you feel the weight of the building above you. This visual representation as your ears popping as the pressure changes. The design fully embraces the oppressive nature that brutalism can hold. The deeper you fight your way into The Oldest House, the more you fight the warped and distorted structure of the building itself. One of the ways the game instantly hits you with the oppressive atmosphere is the stage in the opening. Have you ever gone into an unfamiliar office, applied for a job in a bank or a government building, walked through the door and instantly felt like you don't belong there? The size and scale of even just the reception looming over you, though being totally empty, you can't help but feel like there is someone or something there. It's an amazing trick how simple the design in this game can make you feel out of place. The dreaded silence, the stillness, the emptiness are like your high school at night or an unfamiliar street in a familiar city. Your feeling of normality is slowly being bent. It's only when you dig a little deeper do things get more interesting. The game directly positions shapes and elements high up, with looming balconies and shadows above you, instantly giving you this feeling of being observed. The interior of The Oldest House makes great use of the feeling of liminal space, a sort of uncanny valley of architecture. The world design director, Stuart McDonald, had a history of making brutalist design, and The Oldest House really benefits from this. The simple but heavy concrete feeling of this oppressive atmosphere builds such tension in the world. Stuart created a PowerPoint presentation that he passed to all of the other artists, outlining the core strengths of brutalist design, teaching them the importance of physicality as well as the mass of the style. Elements such as symmetry and repetition play an important part of the design. Straight lines help create focal points, while structure helps bring rhythm and can allow depth. One of the other brilliant aspects of the layout and the design of The Oldest House is symmetry. The straight parallel lines fill the corridors, and they create great sense of focus and unease while playing, drawing your attention to certain areas or just making you look down at the expanse of a corridor. Human brains are naturally attuned to look for symmetry in design. So in these tense moments after fighting a group of his soldiers, there is a moment of slowly ramping up tension, walking down a calm, uniform corridor as your brain looks for anything that might be breaking the flow of the pattern. McDonald has also said he's a big fan of David Lynch and a Stanley Kubrick fan. I'm a big fan of David Lynch. I also love the deliberateness and the considered approach of Kubrick. The use of single-point perspective was something we really learned from this project. This is more clearly seen in the production artwork, the art and making of Control, where Sam mentions various tricks of repeating patterns, depths, lines and shapes that allow The Oldest House to have a defined sense of structure. You don't notice it until you're looking for it, but once you see it, it's hard to shake the wonderfully designed and artificially oppressive atmosphere of the world around you. Once you realise these elements, you can feel the similar vibe in certain spaces of The Oldest House. Combined with the retro flair of the office spaces around it, it could almost be a Kubrick movie. While you as the player have free movement throughout the game, your eyes are still pulled in one direction or another as you look around a corridor, up a flight of stairs, waiting for the sound something coming your way. Even later portions of the game where you have the literal ability to fly, the feeling of claustrophobia doesn't stop you from being too boxed in. But at the same time, you never feel like you're able to go everywhere. The game does feature many unsettling high-vaulted rooms that are perhaps a little too big to feel right for an office space, leaning into their piled high ceiling rooms that almost feel akin to a cathedral with their shape, lighting, and low-frequency echoing footsteps. There is a perfect balance of level design and character abilities that allow you to have creative and powerful combat mechanics, but still allow for a game that feels challenging. This helped slowly by methodically upgrading their combat skill requirements. I guess this means we can start talking about the powers. The powers in Control are one of the key gameplay aspects, and give everything its own distinctive Metroidvania vibe. Every new power you unlock allows you to further explore the oldest house and its secrets, finding more ways to both traverse and fight it as the ever more dangerous hiss appear lurking deeper inside. The powers that you unlock over the course of the game are Launch, Shield, Evade, Seize, and Levitate. Now, typically in games, when we want to select or use a power, we open a weapons wheel, and then we cycle through the powers we want to use, and then we run off game. This isn't a bad game design choice, but it does break flow. As games are adapting to a more cinematic aspect, developers want to maintain this constant feeling of immersion as you play. As a result, the main gameplay controls for your powers are mapped to your gamepad, without the need to access them via additional controls or submenus. This of course seems fantastically obvious, put the controls on the controller, but there was a considerable level of detail in how you control Jessie in-game, just for the levitation mechanic. The dev team and testers went back and forth on what they felt was the most organic way for simply activating Jessie's ability to levitate, coupling functionality with ergonomics and the satisfaction of being able to make her fly. There is a wondrous delight in being caught in a firefight and being able to instantly propel yourself to safety and to a higher vantage point as you catch missiles in the air and return them with gusto. Oh yeah, you can use these powers simultaneously, which makes for some fantastically frenetic gameplay. Much like flying, there is something wonderful in being able to use the evade function just to slam into an enemy while getting behind their front line and using explosive objects to blow their asses clean off. Control bucks the trend of traditional cover shooters and instead actively encourages movement and fast action. The hiss will flank and maneuver to make use of the leveled terrain to try and slow your progress, getting in your face or attacking you from a distance with explosives. The tactics of the hiss are numerous, and encounters require fast thinking and adaptation if you want to stay alive. The game also perfectly levels up the difficulty by slowly bringing more hardened types of combatants, ranging from the very basic foot soldiers to security guards to the hardened ranged combat troopers. With the monstrous screaming hiss entities, there are these manifestations of malformed and misshapen things that were once human, and they shriek at you as they make their presence unknown. This is bolstered by the sheer chaos in the environment around you, when almost every nearby object is something you can use as a physics weapon while running or even flying. The whole combat arena becomes this space of shrapnel and bullets. You can see the inspiration from things like The Matrix, Oldboy, or The Matrix, or even a bit of The Matrix woven throughout the game. Throughout the game's production, game designer Thomas Hudson stressed the importance of not wanting the player to have to dive behind cover and regenerate health, rather working in some sort of item drop or consumable mechanic to regenerate health. It was often noted in playtesting that players would feel dissatisfied by having to sit and hold cover while they regenerated health, but they were constantly being forced to move by enemies throwing grenades. The dev team eventually moved to push the game to have stronger focus on run and gun mechanics. By having health as enemy drops, it motivates the players to move forwards, making headway in pushing deeper into combat. There is such fun in the little tweaks that make the game feel powerful. One of my favourite being is that no object you throw at an enemy actually stops once it impacts them. It doesn't actually stop at all until it hits a wall behind them. It's a nice mechanical tweak that really serves to hone the sheer strength of your abilities. While the game is a shooter, there are occasional puzzles and obstacle sections that break up the combat, that almost all of it is welcome, with the exception of the obstacle course. Most of these take place in the rather liminal Ocean View Motel, the place designed to give you a breathing room from between flying chunks of rebar and bullets. But it has become a strong fan favourite in terms of both mystery and lore. It's creepy and liminal, and no one can agree if it actually exists or not, but I desperately need more answers, please. I need to know... Aside from my very powerful want to know more about the Ocean View Motel, it serves as a nice break in the action, but not for creep factor, allowing just enough dream logic and spooks to slide under the door and keep the tension high. There is still the other unsettling feeling of not knowing what's around the corner, what's lurking in another room, or even who runs this place. Mechanically speaking, however, the game does employ some non-linear upgrading mechanics. In fact, not all the powers are needed to complete the game, with some, such as the shield and seize, being entirely optional to the player. These can be unlocked by performing small side quests, a little reward for exploring the oldest house. Functionally, all the powers can be upgraded over time, unlocking items that serve as consumables to upgrade both your weaponry, abilities, and health. These points-buy systems mean you can upgrade your weaponry, cooldown, and how much energy you can expend in your using your powers, or just being able to blow up his troopers in more creative ways. Wait, I haven't talked about the service weapon. Yeah, okay, wait, no, hang on. Okay, hang on. Okie dokie. So this is the point where I talk about the service weapon, the game's all-in-one arsenal. Very early on in the game's production, it was explored as to what the primary weapon of the game could be, and as the development expanded, so did the concept of the service weapon. The service weapon is known as the Director's Gun, an altered item of incredible power and versatility, with the ability to change and alter as to your specifications require. This modular nature means that you can have multiple gun types without needing Jessie to carry around several different types of gun. It also fits the strange and ethereal nature of the world. Similar to the idea of cinematic mythology, we know the iconography of Luke Skywalker's lightsaber. As Mikkel Kasurainen explained,
when you look at Luke Skywalker or Harry Potter, you have these iconic weapons that are part of who they are and what they represent. When you see Harry's wand, you know he's a wizard. Luke is a Jedi, and that's why he has a lightsaber. It's not just about the weapon itself and the look of it, but also what it means to wield that weapon.
Much like the strange objects of power in the world of Control, the real-world designers used archetypes, icons, and things that live in our own popular culture to help inform the ideas of the Control universe. We don't just see it in the service weapon, but throughout the world of Control. The world is brimming with concepts, some overt that you can read about in documents that are literally hidden in the corners of the rooms you find, all adding to the expanding universe and the texture of the world you play in. That aside, let's now talk about one of the best moments in this game, something that I am totally secure in saying is one of the best moments in modern video game history. The ashtray maze. Look, I can't say anything about the ashtray maze that hasn't already been said. It's perfect game design. It is the distillation of everything you've been working through so far in the game, and then some. The game so far has already been about power and imbalance. Jessie has always been on the back foot, fighting, moving forwards incrementally, seeking minute cover that can be easily torn down by enemy fire. Now you're all powered up. You've got the skills, you've been playing for long enough to know the controls, powers, and abilities all feel second nature to you now. Now it's time to show them what you've got. This sequence mirrors all those famous moments in TV, movies, and anime. It's big, it's bombastic, and it's all set to the best rock music ever? Now, responsive music design isn't new, it's been around for years, but naturally it has improved as time has gone by, and you've probably very recently played a game where it's been a major part of the gameplay experience. Uncharted, Skyward Sword, Super Mario Galaxy, they all work to add just a little bit more life and vibrance to their world, and the exact same is here. But the Ashtray Maze takes this to a whole new level. Using isolated music tracks of guitar riffs, drum beats, and vocals, the game is able to pace the music and speed to your progress throughout the maze, meaning that the song never actually feels like it's looping or dragging, and allowing you to just feel like you are savouring the moment. What makes it even more awesome is that the lyrics for the song Take Control are actually telling you the plot of the game, by a band called Old Gods of Asgard that Alan Wake meets in, well, Alan Wake, while in real life being performed by Poets of the Fall. Am I surprised that when I originally played this game that my PS5 didn't spontaneously combust or failed to function with the sheer level of awesome? Like, why are you even here listening to me talk about this? Why are you not going to play the ashtray sequence right now? Anyway, as I mentioned above, Control's combat is mostly focused on carnage, explosions, fast-moving objects, and lack of cover. Shooting your way from point to point is considered the best, most viable option. Everything has a wonderful sense of momentum, especially taking into consideration the adaptive soundtrack and sound design. The sound design itself is fantastically important in games. It can set the mood, the feeling, and can be an indicator of how tense you need to be, how alert you should be. The lack of sound or music heightens tension, making you more alert to listen for anything that sounds out of place. The Oldest House uses many of these techniques perfectly to feel like you were in one of the most unsettling haunted houses. In Danielewski's House of Leaves, the opening of the 5th chapter talks about the importance of echoes. It is impossible to appreciate the importance of space in the Nevidson record without first taking into account the significance of echoes. However, before even beginning a cursory examination of the lateral and thematic presence in the film, echoes reverberating within the world of itself need to be distinguished. As I mentioned earlier, House of Leaves served as a fascinating inspirational source for the world of Control, especially the Oldest House. It is filled with echoes. Echoes have always been creepy and enticing in a haunted or scary environment. They are you, but they're not. They're a creepy and distorted reflection of your voice with no body, footsteps with no substance, and your own movements almost mockingly parroted back at you by the space that knows you are lost inside it. There are long stretches of corridors where only the sound of Jesse's lone footsteps moving from one location to another can be heard. Or worse, the long, slow, monotonous chanting of those possessed by the hiss. A quiet moment of persistent horror builds it within the tension, the pauses, those heightened moments where our eyes are being drawn to focus on the architecture of the Oldest House, pulled into the twisting corridors, all while the monstrous sounds linger around every corner. Martin Stig Anderson used a variety of different tools when exploring the materials of the Oldest House to try and capture the unsettling atmosphere of the world. During production, Petri Alanko also similarly explored the ideas of having this ever-present feeling of fear to always keep you on edge, something the soundtrack does superbly. Using altered sounds, voices pitched fantastically low, or by capturing sounds with ultrasonic microphones and then pitching them down to audible levels, the sound design team was able to take the soundscape to make it truly chilling, perfectly marrying them with the unsettling visual atmosphere of the world. Petri Alanko also noted that the strong contrast between the hard, brutalist concrete world and the strange, otherworldly organic sound of the music, it really goes a long way to make the Oldest House feel like a living, breathing entity that is, in a more sinister way, makes you feel like you're being constantly watched by something out of sight, stalking you, breathing heavily. I think I could talk forever and a day about the production that goes into every layer and every detail about Control, from the big to the small. If you want to learn more or discover more about the production of Control, I highly recommend The Art and Making of Control, an art book that goes into great detail about the game. I've leaned into it heavily for my own research, but honestly, I was gifted this book primarily because I love the art, the design and the visuals. There are also a number of behind-the-scenes videos that Remedy have produced in order to promote the game, which helped me give an idea as to what work went into production. I keep going about it, but this essay is 19 pages long. Lord, I need to hire an editor. But we still have 2 more parts, so let's get moving. I mean, yeah, I'm writing this essay, so of course this game is going to have left an impact. It's gonna sit somewhere on that top 10 list of games that all YouTubers who talk about games have. That probably means by YouTube gaming law, I need to go and play the original Deus Ex. Statistically, at least one person will have now reinstalled that game because I mentioned it. You're welcome. Still, a lot of this game got me thinking. I can't say I fought off interdimensional cosmic horror that lives in the heart of a clandestine government agency, but I can relate to Jesse. Because, as we all know, Jesse Faden is transgender. There, I said it. The essay is over now, you can go home. Okay, first off, hide all my trans audience out there. Hey gang, remember to take your HRT and drink something that isn't coffee. You know all about this if you've played the game. You can take 5 and go play Control for the rest of the essay. For my cis friends, buckle up. So, the main theme of the game is fighting something impossibly huge. Something that makes you want to conform to what it defines as its own reality. Not only that, but Jessie's story is that of her finding her own identity. It's about reclaiming part of her personhood she had lost years ago. There's a struggle to find an identity that exists beyond trauma, to fully see yourself as a person that isn't just a sum of all the bad things that ever happened to you. To have agency for the first ever time in your life and to move beyond the things that hurt you the most. And you also get to wear pretty cat ears, which is also very poggers and trans. Okay, getting serious now. When you're trans, there is a god-awful amount of 2 things that you have to contend with. Transphobes and paperwork, and sometimes they join forces to be known as the terrifying and hideous entity known as the British government. Navigating everything to do with transitioning is, putting it mildly, a mess. You have to do so much goddamn paperwork, and when that's done, you have to do paperwork for the paperwork. And this isn't even hyperbole. There is actual paperwork to make sure the paperwork is in order. You have to deal with faceless groups who you don't know, and they don't know who you are, but they get to decide if you're the right kind of transgender to be allowed to be legally recognized as trans. And when that's done, you have to contend with the media that demonizes you, a public that you don't know if you can trust, and an insidious government that is using your ideology as part of a culture war. You feel exposed and used, and you have to do a lot of fighting to be taken seriously. Then there's that idea of enforced conformity. The fact that everything here that opposes you goes against the grain of who you really are, forcibly and painfully, if need be. The very opening of the narration of the game highlights the nature of how sometimes the world can just feel wrong. We live in a room and there's a poster on the wall. We stare at it and we think that's the whole world. The room and the poster. The picture is something nice, a landscape, a famous person. The room is a cell, and the picture can be different for each of us. It can be beautiful or terrible. We're all transfixed, but it's all a lie. Something to distract us from the truth. They're lying to us. We're lying to ourselves. This room is not the world. This room is so much bigger and so much stranger. There is a hole behind that poster that leads to the real world. We all feel safe in that room. Sometimes something crawls out from behind the poster as the ones that see it happen freak out and try to forget what they saw. Now, this whole opening monologue has what we in the writing business like to call themes. This means I get to talk about egg theory. When you're trans, and you don't know that you're trans, you don't always have the language and the concepts to know what you are. You are very lost and exceptionally isolated, more so if you have a predominantly cis-het friend group and family. And when you're at this point, you're an egg. Once you've realised you're trans, that egg cracks. You can't unring a bell, and you can't unrealise who you are. That whole sequence of living in a cell, a room with a facade keeping the rest of the world, the truth, at bay, it has a lot of vibes. At least it has things that very personally resonate with me. The feelings of wanting to keep out a world with a constructive narrative. A lot of trans people will often create a world around them, a narrative that tries to push those feelings deep down. I did it. I pushed those feelings aside and ignored them for years because living in that tiny cell and covering up that hole was what I thought was so much easier. Little did I realise. A big theme written into the materials of Control is finding redacted documents that have been partially obscured, or just fully obscured under a thick haze of black stripes. It's hiding. It's covering things up. From you and from even the person who wrote it. The person who saw this now attempts to hide what it is. Words, things, and feelings. Jessie experiences the wrongness. When you're an egg, you don't know you are trans yet, but there is a feeling of wrongness about the world around you. For me, it was like living in a clock where none of the gears fit together. There were parts turning, machines whirring, and nothing felt interconnected. Elements just turned and spun and nothing connected. And then my egg cracked, and for some reason all those parts came together. That realization helped. It was the final part that let everything smoothly come together to spin anew. Coming to terms with your own complex emotions on a matter are difficult, more so when it's something you lack the language or understanding for. You might indeed freak out or try to forget what you see. I will never say that this is the only true reading for the character of Jessie Faden, and if more people see more ideas, more concepts, more experiences, and more in her character and her arc, it's a testament to how well this game is written. But for me, it's about Jessie being trans. Jessie Faden is me, and potentially you, the young queer watching this? And the FBC, for all its faults, is a space she yearns for. A space full of answers, safety, and ironically comfort. The oldest house became a home. No matter what they told me, all those years ago, it's real now. I didn't imagine this. I want to be part of this world. Someone who so long was denied their personhood and their right to be who they are, finally takes up the power and the ability to be them. It is perhaps some of the most fun symbology I've ever found in a game, being able to deconstruct it and make it my own. Of course, this is only my reading of the game. As far as I'm aware, Courtney Hope, the voice actor and model and motion capture artist for Jessie Faden, is cisgender, and I doubt when it came to the writing stage that the story was designed to focus on this theme. Certainly there is a large queer following behind Jessie, as well as Emily. They are cute, and there's a lot of material that feels incredibly intentional to make them the perfect ship, but I digress. Sometimes, even when you have to put a little bit of work in, it's nice to see yourself in media. Plus, have you ever noticed how both Dylan and Jessie can be both girl and boy names? Funny that. I think the funniest part about this game is that I've barely touched the vast expanse of what it is. Not just as a game, but as a fandom. As a collective of people who all share the same love. In a script built up into 22 pages, there are things I could talk about that would quadruple the length of what is already probably the most convoluted and long essay I have ever made. But it's worth it. The community behind Control, however, is also perhaps one of passion, creativity, and just plain fun. One of the biggest aspects I need to talk about is captured control. Gaming photography is not a new trend, but certainly a game that is this beautiful, there are a grand number of gaming photographers dedicated to the weird and even the mundane aspects of this game. From combat to characters, these are just some of the shots I captured for the Altered April event, Captured Control, a series of challenges for each day of April, with every day of someone offering a brand new feast for the eyes. It was a new way to share the game. It was a new way to share a game they loved through a new and exciting challenge. The photo community for Control is constantly active, with the Oldest House Tuesday and Faden Friday being popular tags on Twitter. I particularly have them to thank for this essay. Having played Control to death and back, I discovered the community with their intense love for all the detail in this game. They kindled a new interest for it. The up close, the distant, the surreal, the strange. And it got me thinking about this essay. From people to brutalism to the astral plane to just things in an office. It's all wonderful. I will never stop talking about how this game has a strange and raw beauty of the oldest house, the juxtaposition of old anachronistic features and the nightmare horror of the reality that lies around it. As a setting, as a place, its vaulted ceilings escaped into shadows, its distorted rooms are made up of Escher-like fragments, its never-ending mass of pipes. I can hear myself thinking as I keep working on it, here I go again. But that's just me and my firm love for all of this game. All of the people who worked so hard to make it real. The fandom who are just as creative and conspiratorial about all the little clues scattered through the walls. I hope then that in this essay I have perhaps convinced you that Control really is awesome. Thanks for watching.
Todeksi luulin merta kerran, runon lausui hän. Mysteerin sen syövereissä vietti elämän. Alla synkän valtameren varjois vain